Hi everyone, it's Katie, and I'm here today with a long-awaited review, and that is of the Watersprite Tarot by Alison Muir McDonald. Of course, I will be leaving all of her links below, so you can find her in this deck in the description box. I have had this deck for a good, I think it's coming on 6 months now, and from the very first minute that I got it, I have been asked multiple times to do a review. So I am very sorry that it's taken me so long to get this out, but I just wanted to work with it and feel like I had a working relationship with this deck so that I could give it an honest review. I didn't really want to just give a really shallow sort of rundown of the deck, because I really do feel like it deserves a lot more than that. This is an Australian independently published deck. It comes in a very hard box that is actually quite a bit larger than the cards, so you can, you know, store a crystal or something along with the cards in there. If you purchase the deck alone, this is all that comes with your purchase. It doesn't come with a book or anything. However, you can purchase separately a guidebook, a companion book, which is coloured and illustrated and really quite comprehensive. And I'm just noticing on the back of the book it says 5% of all sales will be donated to animal welfare organisations. So that's nice. So I'll talk briefly first about the book. It's about 100 pages, but it's quite large pages, and as I said, it's fully coloured. There's not a lot of fluff in this book. It starts with an introduction on the tarot cards, a brief introduction to what the major arcana are, a little bit of a discussion about archetypes, which obviously discusses Jung a little bit, and then there is kind of like a cheat sheet to give you a brief rundown or a quick reference guide for the meanings of the majors. And then each of the majors is laid out like this. There is a large image and then a whole page of text. The text for each of the majors is broken down into 4 sections. The first is symbolism, which is probably my favourite. It has a rundown of all of the major pieces of symbolism that you'll see in the card. For example, for the Fool, we talk about the 0, the number, the dog, the precipice, the flute, the pouch, and the background. The second section is the story of the card. For this example, it's the story of the Fool. And so here we have a couple of paragraphs basically just kind of talking about this character of the Fool and, you know, what he's doing, what he's up to, and what he represents. She also mentions the different archetypes that this card can represent. So for example, she says the archetype of the Fool is that of the divine child. The Jungian archetype is that of the wanderer. The third section is meaning. So obviously that's just quite a substantial paragraph on how we might interpret that card. And the fourth and final section is the reversed meaning. So it's really thorough and really useful. Especially, as I mentioned, I loved the breakdown of the symbolism. I think that really kind of helps you start, if you aren't already, or strengthens your ability to read the cards for yourself. Especially if you want to have an understanding of the symbolism, which this deck is very much steeped in. There is also a blank card in this deck, which basically she pretty much just says in the book that you can interpret it however you want. Then we get a brief introduction into the minor arcana, and there is a breakdown of all of the suits and, you know, kind of what they all pertain to. So for example, cups, we have love and emotions. The element of water, astrological signs Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, traditionally represents the church and clergy. And then there's a list of quite a number of different positive and negative associations that the cup suit might have. For example, for positive associations, we might be talking about spiritual matters, the soul, relationships, soulmates, etc. For negative, it might be vanity, loneliness, abandonment. There's also a 2-page breakdown of the court cards, and she kind of goes through a whole lot of different ways that people might read them. For example, whether they represent people or characteristics. She also talks about the different elemental associations that she assigns to the courts. In this deck, it's kings are earth, queens are water, knights are fire, and pages are air, which is how I learnt, although I know that a lot of people will switch. I've seen pretty much all of them switch except the queen. And then for each of the minor cards, we get a page, which includes a smaller but still very big and coloured image of the card. As an introduction to the card, the meaning and the reverse meaning. The quartz are all on a double page together. Then at the back of the book she has a Celtic cross spread layout and a list of the archetypes of the major arcana, and that is it. So like I said, there's no fluff in this book. It's explanations of the cards and how to read them, and one spread. But I really like the way in which she has kind of broken down all of the meanings. I think she's done a really good job of providing specific but also holistic interpretations of the cards and ways to approach the cards. The cards are very thick, so the deck obviously therefore is quite thick as well. They're quite a bit smaller than regular cards, and they have quite rounded corners, which makes them feel very different, but I quite like it. It feels more intimate almost, I'm not sure. Just for comparison's sake, this is a standard Rider-Waite card, and it actually is basically the same. It's just a lot more rounder. It's a lot rounder. So I guess the rounded cards does make it feel quite a bit smaller. I'm really quite surprised by that. I haven't compared them before. But yeah, it is exactly the same size as my commemorative Pamela Colman Smith Rider-Waite deck. It's just that the corners are so much rounder that it feels quite a bit smaller. As I said, the cardstock is really quite thick. They do have a glossy finish, but it's not slippery. And this is the backing. They're very pretty and reversible. Now each of the cards does have a thin white border, but it is quite thin and I don't find it obtrusive. They all have their name at the bottom and the number up the top. This is Strength. Now the artwork on these I think is gorgeous. It's very watercolory, very flowy, lots of blues and that more cool tones. I think it's just beautiful. I really love the artwork in this. So it does all look quite gentle and I'm not sure what word I'm looking for. I think it's almost surprising in quite how much detail and depth of symbolism there are in these cards. I think sometimes, you know, they look so friendly and gorgeous and beautiful that you're not quite expecting how much depth there is, if that makes sense. There is a lot more to these cards than you might expect at first glance, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's a Magician. And perhaps that is why it took me so long to kind of really start to feel like I was having a handle of these cards. I know when I very first got it, I drew the Hierophant for how I needed to approach the deck. And I'd actually kind of forgotten about that until I did a deck interview with it when I started working with it again a couple of weeks ago. And the Hierophant came up again for how I needed to be working with it or how it saw itself. So it is quite traditional in a lot of ways, and I think it does require quite a bit of book knowledge, understanding of the cards. It demanded a level of respect, I think. I guess it wasn't really too concerned with small talk. It didn't really want to talk about the everyday. It wasn't really interested in being read for simple things. I worked with this the week after I worked with the Mystic Fairy Tarot, which if you watch that video you will know I had so much fun with. This deck was an entirely different experience. It wasn't fun in that sense. It gave hugely profound and meaningful and deep insight, but it didn't really want to be bothered with the small things. I kind of feel like this isn't a deck that I'm going to be wanting to use for anything and everything. It's not the sort of deck that I'm going to be using every other day. But I do think for more spiritual, emotional, watery needs, this deck really does shine. It's very thoughtful. It's very deep. There's just a lot to this deck. And although it might not have been the most fun I've ever had with a deck over the past week or two, I still noticed, you know, when I did kind of engage with it on that very serious, meaningful level, it responded. It really did. I really do feel like this is the sort of deck that you're not going to get to know in the period of a week or two. I mean, with any deck there's always continued learning, but I felt like after working a week with, you know, for example, the Mystic Fairy, I felt like I really had a good handle on it. I knew how to work with it. I knew how to talk with it. This deck, obviously, it's been 6 months since I've had it, and I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface. I did a whole video pretty much talking about the Eight of Swords quite a while ago, and I think that is a perfect example of when this deck showed up for me. I'll link the video below. Basically, I felt myself receding into depression, and I was really kind of struggling with that. Terrified of, you know, a major relapse, and also just experiencing those sensations and feelings of depression. I went to this deck and I pulled the Eight of Swords, and obviously, you know, that was just so poignant for me at that time, and I really do feel like this deck is so spot on. It really is, but it's most useful when there's an emotional need or a spiritual need. I really do think of it kind of as the Hierophant, you know, it really is kind of almost that teacher guide. It doesn't want to be bothered with the small things, and it wants you to take it seriously and devote yourself to the conversation, and it takes its responsibility very seriously. So it is very watery and beautiful and feminine, and I think it does lend itself very well to those more watery topics of spirituality and emotion and relationships. This is the extra card, the blank card that I mentioned. So I would certainly recommend this deck for anyone to whom this artwork appeals. But I would stress that, at least for me, it wasn't the sort of deck that I tore open and I just started working with and I couldn't put down and was so much fun, and it was just a completely different experience. It was really that more steady relationship that demanded a little bit more of me, and that I was really required to nurture and nourish a relationship that grew over time with this deck. So it's not that immediate gratification, sling out a couple of cards and see what turns up. For me, this deck I've really had to approach in a different way. I've had to approach it with a level of reverence, and I think that's where this deck really excels for me, in that more watery realm. So it was love at first sight for me when I saw the imagery. I fell in love with the imagery and knew I had to have the deck. But as far as working with this deck, that has been a slow, steady build-up for me. I have learnt to love this deck in a different way to just liking the imagery. I've learnt to love how this deck responds to me when I need it to. I actually just got a little bit emotional then. It really does show up for me. It's kind of that supportive friend that you know is always going to be there and support you in exactly the way you need it to, but might not be the sort of friend that you catch up for coffee every second weekend. So again, I do apologize that this review has taken me so damn long to get to, but I hope you can appreciate why I really wanted to give this deck, I really wanted to do it justice in a review. I wanted to make sure that I was speaking from a place of connection with this deck. I didn't want to just show you some pretty images, because the images are beautiful, but there's a soul to this deck. I'll leave all of Alison's links in the description box below. You can also purchase this deck on eBay, so I'll leave links to that below. It is from Alison, but some people find eBay just a bit easier to navigate. Do keep in mind too, though, that the Australian dollar is terrible at the moment. I think we're at less than 70 cents for an American dollar. So keep that in mind when you're viewing the dollar value of this deck. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And I will talk to you all again very soon. So much love, guys. Bye.